Boom. You should be in command line basics for Drupal site builders. That's the topic right now. So let's just jump in. My name is Tara King. I am here, I work for Pantheon as our developer outreach manager. And what that means is I get to go into the Drupal community and sort of meet people, hear what they're struggling with, bring Pantheon to them, bring them to Pantheon, that kind of thing. Super love this job. It's really awesome. You can find me all over the internet as Sparkling Robots, and my email's here if you have any questions after the talk. When I'm not giving talks at DrupalCon, I really like reading, big fiction fan. I also co-organize a board gaming convention, which is sadly not happening right now because of all the things. And I'm also a big advocate for diversity and inclusion in free and open source software communities, unsurprisingly, specifically the Drupal community. I'd love to hear from you all kind of what you're interested in learning today, where you're at in your Drupal journey, how much command line experience you have. So don't be shy about putting that in the chat. I'm going to talk a little bit about my history. So right now I work at Pantheon, but I am a fully self-taught developer. And I started because I was actually building HTML templates on Diaryland back in 1999. I don't know if anybody even remembers that website, but totally self-taught, like viewing source on strangers' web pages and like copying HTML out and learning myself. So that's kind of how I got started. And then I got into print design, and I thought to myself, oh, I'll be a front-end developer. I don't know why I thought this. I had no computer science background. And I was gifted a Drupal site at one point for my dance company. And so I was the admin for the site. We didn't have money to pay somebody else. So anything I wanted to make it look better, I had to figure out. Anything I wanted to change the way that it was, displaying content, I had to figure it out. And this site was a Drupal 6 site. So from there, that basically got me started on the path to becoming a developer. And before I worked at Pantheon, I was a senior Drupal developer at Universal Music. So I've kind of worked everything from like small freelance up to the biggest companies. And I would say the one thing that really kind of launched my career in Drupal was finally getting comfortable with the command line. It kind of opened up some developer-y type skills that I didn't have as a site builder. And I don't think that you have to become a developer because you've learned the command line. I think site builders can use these tools. They're not just for developers. So that's where this talk really came out of. So this talk is really for people who are building sites, but are maybe not comfortable with development tools, or even developers who aren't comfortable in the command line. So I'm going to just quickly scan through some of this stuff here. Hold on, I think there's some noise on my side. I'm going to mute for just one moment. All right, am I going to? Not too loud. So it looks like not a lot of command line experience. Cool. Kristen, hi Kristen, I know you. This is awesome. Thanks for the feedback. It helps me kind of customize the talk. So let's just get started. We are going to start with the very, very, very basics of the command line, just to make sure that everybody's kind of starting at the beginning. So what is the command line? A lot of people think that it is this. It's just like numbers and letters flying through space. It makes you look like a super cool hacker. It is unfortunately not that. It's really just this, which is a window on your computer. It's basically just a place where you type commands to the computer. I really appreciate the simplicity of this quote. The command line is at its heart simply a place where you type commands to the computer. So I remember when I was learning kind of why should I do this, right? I already have what we call graphical user interface. This is your default machine. Like if you have a MacBook or a Windows machine, there's windows you can move around, and it's basically visual metaphors for how you interact with a computer, right? Super easy to use, but sometimes it doesn't have as much power, as much customization as you might want. The command line is a text-based way of interacting with the computer, and because you don't have to build out these visual metaphors, there's a lot of power and sort of sophistication with what you can ask for the command line to do. So Why would you learn the command line instead of just using the interface, graphical user interface? It's a lot faster. If you think of installing a module, you're going to want to go to the browser, you're going to need to log in, you're going to have to navigate to the modules page, add the module, enable the module. Maybe it takes 2 minutes, right? If you're doing it on the command line, you're going to need to open the terminal, maybe authenticate, and then run a single command. So it's maybe 30, 45 seconds. And when you start to look at that task that you're doing every single week, or if you're multiplying it by 10 sites or 100 sites, that can really add up, right? So even if you're just doing site building stuff and not writing fresh new code, this stuff is a really, really powerful time saver. It's also really efficient. If you ask the command line to do something 1,000 times, it'll do it 1,000 times the same way. Whereas if you ask yourself to do something 1,000 times, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you might not do it every single time exactly the same way. Once you start getting into command line tools, you can also get into heavier automation. So you can start writing bash scripts. You can start automating your updates. There's a lot of powerful stuff here that doesn't require writing PHP code or anything like that. So that's really exciting. And of course, you do look awesome every time you have the command line open and somebody sees you're doing something super advanced, even if it's actually really simple. So let's go on to have a brief warning for you. Be careful on the command line. It's not inherently more dangerous. It's not inherently scarier. But a lot of times when you're using the Derby Dragons is right, Anna. Whenever you're using the graphical user interface, there's often a confirmation pop-up that says, are you sure you want to reformat your hard drive or whatever? The command line typically has a lot fewer warnings. So you can delete quite a lot of files very, very quickly. Yes, as Chris is saying, very, very fast. There's an amazing video on YouTube where the Pixar team is talking about the time an engineer accidentally ran a 4-character command that deleted almost all of Toy Story 2. It's a pretty funny story, and the happy ending is that they had backups. So when you're working with the command line, just make sure you know what you're doing. This is not a good time to start copy pasting things that you're finding on Google. Yep, Kirsten knows the command. And make sure you have a robust backup in place so that in case, mistakes happen, we're humans, totally fine for that to happen. You just want to make sure that you can, rewind if need be. But don't panic. As the great Douglas Adams might have said, don't panic. It's going to be fine. We're going to show you a bunch of stuff today that is non-destructive, so you can just get warmed up on the command line before, removing a bunch of files. So let's get into that now. All right. We're going to go through at the beginning file structure on the command line, how you navigate around, how you open the terminal windows. This is very, very basics. This is also the kind of stuff that when I was learning, I didn't know how to Google because I didn't know the proper terminology for it. So there's a lot of vocabulary in this section. If you've never opened the terminal window, which is just that text box we showed earlier, these are the pathways for Mac OS and Linux. You can do all of the same stuff that I'm talking about on Windows, but it's a slightly different sort of syntax. So I left it out. We can talk later if you have questions. And this is the terminal, which is also known as the console or the shell. What happens when you open this app is that you're going to get this window again, right? Just this big black text box. This is where you enter the commands. And what you're seeing here is the prompt. So I'm going to go through the different pieces of the prompt so that when, like I said, again, when you're trying to Google, when you're trying to learn this stuff on your own, you have the right vocabulary. So the prompt is often it'll show your location. In this case, it's in a projects folder. And then there's a cursor that is indicating where you're entering text. It's very much like any text editor you've used before. Then you have the command. So this is the action. This is what you want the computer to do. It typically is the very first thing that you're going to enter. There's something called the argument. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by funny chats. Then there's the argument, which is the location or the file that you want the computer to act on. In this case, RM stands for remove. And then if you pass out the argument of foo.txt, it's going to remove the file named foo.txt. And then the last thing, and this is where the power of the command line really starts to kind of shine, is the flag or the option. And this is the how you want the computer to take the action. In the case of this command, -f is forcible, basically meaning don't ask again, just please delete the file. But you can have a very large number of options that can really help you customize, pass in certain information, and we'll see a bunch of examples of that later. I just wanted to show you this so that you have sort of this format, this template prepared, and you'll start to recognize it, I think, as we go through. I do have a tutorial listed here that is a really fantastic command line basics. And at the end of my slides, I have a list of all the resources I reference. So no need to, panic about that. Again, don't panic. Yes, drushcommands.com is awesome. We will be getting to Drush stuff later. So this is what happens when you open up your terminal. If you're familiar with text-based role-playing adventures of the 80s, it's very, very similar, right? You open your terminal and you're in a room, in a directory, right? So from there, you're going to want to figure out which directory you're in, because almost all commands are going to be run relative to your current location. So the first thing you can do is run pwd. You just type in those 3 letters, hit enter, and it's going to print your working directory. That means where you are right now. So this case prints out the folder that you're in. And then let's say you want to look around the room that you're in, so to speak. You'll use ls, which is going to list the files in the directory. So if we try this, it's going to output this list of, like, I think it's 10 items. But this isn't terribly helpful, right? There's not a lot of information about what these are. Are they files? Are they directories? How big? There's not a lot of information there. So we are going to pass it some options. So A and L are 2 options that are available to you with the ls command. A stands for all, L is for long format. And you'll notice here that our options are actually just combined into one. -AL saves you some keystrokes. The command line is sort of famously obsessed with reducing number of keystrokes. So it's very compact and tight. And when you run that command, you're going to get this total page of gibberish. The first time I saw this, I was definitely a little overwhelmed. So we are going to break this down into just 2 areas that I think will give you a lot of the sort of Linux, Unix style conventions of the command line. And then we'll move on to more Drupal specific stuff. So first of all, on the left side over here, there's this puzzle that the computer is offering to you. And if you can figure out this puzzle, you can alter any file on your system. It's very exciting. The first digit here is basically directory versus file. So if it's a D, it means it's a directory. If it's a dash, it means it's a file. So that's pretty straightforward. Then we have these repeating sets of 3 digits, RWX or R-X. Each of these can be either the letter or a dash, and they stand for read, write, and execute. These are the permissions files. So if you've ever run into something where Drupal is complaining that it can't write a file because it doesn't have sufficient permissions, or if you've ever seen like a Stack Overflow post saying, oh, just change the permissions to 700, change the permissions to 777. This is how you actually can figure out what the permissions are for any given file. I'm not going to go too far down the rabbit hole because there's literally every slide of this could probably be its own mini presentation. But the reason it repeats 3 times is because there are 3 groups. There's the owner, the group, and then there's everyone else, which is literally the entire internet. So you might think that you don't ever want the internet to execute something, but actually you often want them that for like a PHP process that needs to be run. So it's not always as intuitive as it looks, but again, I have a resource for this. So if this is very interesting to you, it'll be in the slides at the end. So we're back here at our LS. We figured out the far left side, and now we're going to look at the far right side. This is the same information we saw before. It's just the file and directory names that are contained within our current working directory. We can also see if I left this, it's kind of tiny on the left side. You can see if it's a directory or a file. So that's the other side that you really are going to start using from the very beginning. So now that we know where we are on the file system, we can change. We can change into a different directory. So if we need to go into the contrib folder, if we need to go into the modules folder, that is as simple as cd and then the name of the location. Again, you're going to want to do that relative to your current location in the file system. If you want to remove a file, rmstyle.css. And without going into every Linux command that there is, because that would be exhausting for everyone, I just wanted to kind of give you a few options of what's out there so you can kind of see the basic concepts that are behind it. I do think Google is a really powerful tool. Like I said, you don't want to just copy paste from Google into your machine, but I've definitely found tons of articles that are best way to unzip a file, Mac OS, and it'll have like 9 different ways, different options that you can pass, different results that you'll get by doing that. So I think there's a lot to learn there. And then in the command line itself, there's something called the man page, which is short for manual. And if you run man and then the name of the command, it'll give you all kinds of information about what options are available to you, what the results are going to be. It's super helpful. You can also pass in --help or -h many times. So that's a great way to kind of, while you're still on the command line, continue learning about it. Since sometimes this stuff can be, like I said, a little hard to Google. Because we are web developers, I also wanted to cover connecting to other computers via the command line. So all the stuff I talked about, you could run on your local computer right now, the laptop right in front of you. But if you want to work on your host files, you're going to probably be running into FTP, SFTP, and SSH. I'm going to take these 2 at a time. FTP and SFTP are both file transfer protocols. One of them is secure, so you can guess which one I think is better. And this is basically just moving files around. So it's not an interactive shell, which is what SSH is. They're just ways of basically moving files around, renaming files, that kind of thing. SSH, known as secure shell, is basically an interactive session on the remote machine, just like you can do on your local. So that's typically when you want command line access, you might want SSH. I work for Pantheon. We have a slightly different way of doing it. But typically that's the kind of thing you want to do. And I will say that my very first command line experience, I was very scared, and then I was also very proud of myself when I had done it, was creating an SSH key. I have a link here to the Pantheon docs. It's a super simple process that is not Pantheon specific as to how you actually do this process. But it basically enables you to clone something down from GitHub or something like that. And it's very easy. It's non-destructive. It takes 5 minutes tops. And then you'll have used the command line. So if you've never done it before, I highly recommend just creating an SSH key, even if you don't upload it anywhere. Just go in there, run the command. Like I said, it's in the docs here, and I'll send the link out. Really easy way to get started. Another common use case is version control, which I do not have remotely enough time to get into today. But I wanted to kind of talk about what version control is, why developers are obsessed with it. I personally, you don't have to use the command line to use version control. It's my personal favorite way of doing it, but I'm guessing that you already have a version control system in place. So you make a file, mycoolproject.txt. Cool. And then you're working on it and you think, oh, I've got a slightly better version, but it's not, I don't want to lose the first version. So now you have mycoolproject2.txt. You do that same process, you get mycoolproject3.txt. Then you make a small change that makes it enough to name it a new thing, but not enough to name it version 4. So now you have mycoolproject3b.txt. Maybe then you send it to me for feedback. Well, I send it back to you with my name on it because I want to make sure you understand which version it is. Then you send my feedback to Steve, and Steve puts his name on it because he saw me do the same thing. It's getting exhausting now, but now we have mycoolproject final, except you definitely forgot there was a typo, so now it's final. And then we have final 2 last change I promise. I am guilty of this. It is a version control system, right? You have old versions saved. It totally counts, but I infinitely prefer Git. Git is basically an undo button for your bad ideas, for your bad work, for any mistakes you might make. As a site builder, when I started using Git, it freed me up from a lot of anxiety around, let's say, I don't know how many of you were around in the Drupal get-in days. There was a ton of security scare, big scare. I had a bunch of sites that I was managing. In the chat, it was a traumatic time for all of us. And I was doing updates really quickly because I needed to get them applied as soon as possible. And I had so much anxiety because I was worried that I would apply something, the site would come down, and I wouldn't know what change had done it. Bad time. So Git prevents all of that anxiety because every change you make is tracked in terms of who did it, when they did it, and exactly which characters they changed in which files on which lines. It's super powerful. That's all I'm going to say about it. Git is opaque. Yeah, I have This has a swear word in it. I think this is a pretty awesome resource for learning Git, and I'd be happy to talk more about how I learned Git. There's a lot of good resources out there. Oh, all right. I'm so sorry, Inka, about Drupalgeddon. It was a really terrible time for all of us. I'm seeing some questions, and I will get to some of these for sure. I'll try to get to all of them. So Drush, I've been seeing Drush talk in the chat here. Drush is, I feel like I should know the English major term for this. It's a word that is made of two parts of other words, Drupal and shell, Drush. And it is a command line interface for Drupal. So tasks that you might normally log into the Drupal backend to update a module or something like that, Drush can do it for you via the command line. And Drush can do a whole lot more. So it's not just the admin tools, there's a bunch of other stuff. And I think that's really what pushed me as a site builder into learning these tools was coming up against things, and developers would just say, oh, just use Drush to do that. Just use Drush. And I was like, I'm too scared of it. I can't do it. So let's just, I'm going to walk you through, again, a couple sample commands to kind of get your juices flowing, your inspiration going, and then we'll have time for questions. So Drush user create is a command that will create a user. This one in this case, so let's go back to our initial sort of vocabulary around how a command is formed. The actual command is user create, and this basically says, I want to use Drush to run the command. So sometimes you'll see the tool appear before the command itself. Then we're passing in the argument of Tara, that's the username that's going to be created. And then we're passing in an option of mail, and that's the mail, the email address that you want to use for that account. You can also pass in password, user role. There's like 25 different things you can do. This is really helpful if you have lost access to your admin site, but you still have SSH access to your site. Definitely seen people use it for that. It's also helpful if you want to programmatically create or import users from, say, like a CSV file or some kind of list. You can use Drush to do that much more quickly than you clicking through hundreds of times on the admin screen. You can also alter users. So a lot of Drush commands kind of have the same base. They like a lot of them affect the user. This one adds roles. You can remove roles. You can delete users. This is adding the user, the role admin to the account using that email. So that's really handy sometimes when you just want to update a bunch of people really quickly. This one is a very simple command. Drush ULI will, when you type this in, it will pass you a link to log into your site as whatever user you have access as. So this can be really fast, again, if you lose access to the admin side, or if you're just used to working in the command line, it's really nice to not have to go and like figure out where that admin screen is. It can be really speedy. You can use Drush to download themes and modules from Drupal.org. In this case, we're downloading Claudio, which is a new admin theme. And if you want to superpower or get a little bit even more efficient, you can actually enable the theme. And if you haven't downloaded it yet, it'll ask you if you want to. And you can say, yes, I want to download it. Or you can pass in this flag of -y, which says, just say yes to any questions. You don't really want to hear the questions. You just say yes to all of them. And so when it asks, do you want to download the theme, it will go ahead and do that for you. And then it will also enable it. So if you're used to going into the admin screen and doing this by hand, I think this, I don't know, 15 characters here can do that same job for you like that. It's really, really, really speedy. Definitely seeing some stuff in the chat about config management on Drupal. If you don't understand the basics of config management yet, my colleague David Needham did an awesome config management for beginners this morning, and it'll come up when they put the stuff. I'm not sure when the videos are going to be posted. It involved costume changes. But basically what this does is it takes settings that are stored in the database, pushes them to a file that you can then basically put into version control and import onto your live site, or if you're using multiple development environments. I think this was a huge win in Drupal 8. It's part of Drupal 9 as well. No offense to features, much easier to use than features in Drupal 7. So Drush can do config import, config export, a bunch of other stuff as well. You can also update Drupal core or any modules, themes that you want to update. Drush up Drupal will get that done for you. Obviously, this could be a bit destructive. You always want to make sure with updates that you're doing sufficient testing and that kind of thing, but it is super, super fast, much easier than the old method of like downloading a bunch of files, unzipping them into a location, yada, yada, yada. And then in terms of things that I think are super awesome and are kind of a pain to do on your own, Drush can also sanitize your database. So it can remove user passwords, personal information, all kinds of stuff that I think we should do more of in Drupal. We should be more sensitive with the information when we're cloning databases from environment to environment. And Drush will do that sanitization for you. Obviously, again, a destructive command. So you don't want to be running this just on live. That could be very upsetting for some people. Drushcommands.com also got put in the chat here, is an awesome resource for learning all of the Drush commands that are available to you. Drush was really the thing that pushed me to understand the command line. It just seemed invaluable. I heard so many good things about it. So I would highly recommend giving this a try. The documentation on that website has how to install it on your local machine. A lot of Drupal-friendly hosts, Pantheon, Acquia, have Drush installed, or you can generally install it yourself. So highly recommend getting started with Drush. And of course, you know, the command line is an incredibly powerful tool. I have never, ever, ever regretted learning more about it. Like I said, I think it kind of unlocked a lot of doors for me. It does take some persistence and curiosity, but you're all here at the very last hour of DrupalCon Global, which was a 12-hour event. So I'm guessing you have a lot of persistence and curiosity. So I'm sure you will be able to learn all of these cool tools. And of course, you know, once you get started, it's like, there's always just one more thing to learn. It's a sort of endless rabbit hole, but Composer is something that is definitely not going away in the Drupal space. And I think for site builders, it requires a lot of command line knowledge, and it can be very intimidating. But I think it's definitely something you can learn. Drupal console is really cool. You can use bash scripting, which is just writing little scripts that will run a series of commands for you. You can use Docker and make Docker work better for you. So there's a lot out there, and I just wanted to kind of give a very ground level understanding of what's possible. As I said, my slides are here. Please let me know if this link doesn't work. I tested it earlier, but sometimes I have issues with Bitly links. This has, I'll skip forward briefly, but it has this exact list of resources in it, so you can go and learn about any of the concepts we talked about in more depth. So with that, I have about 15 minutes left for questions. I'd be delighted to take any questions you have. Again, thank you so much. And thank you to Pantheon for sponsoring me to be here and to give talks like this. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or anywhere as Sparkling Robots. I'm going to take a moment to scroll back and see if I've missed any questions, and feel free to type stuff in as needed. Looks like we have a nice wide range of experience here, so that's fun. All right. I'm going to plug in my MiFi so that I don't lose internet in the middle of the session. That'd be very upsetting for everyone. Okay. A resource for learning how Drupal works and what Drush commands correspond to what. Hunter asked that question. As Ruby put in the chat, drushcommands.com is the best location for kind of just a resource for that information. It's very command line, it's a little bit terse, I guess. It's a little sparse in terms of what exactly it all does, but it is there. And I think it's really the best way to get started. And generally, if you're thinking, I wonder if you can, it's in there. It has a great search function, so you can type in, the word user, and it'll show you everything that'll act on the user entity type in Drupal. So that's really cool. I hope that helps. But that's the best resource for sure. Jurassic Park reference from Anna Roberts, yay. Commands like cr confuse me also. What cache is getting rebuilt? As Ruby's saying, it is basically Drupal's cache. So Drupal has its own internal caching mechanism. So Drush CR will basically dump and rebuild that cache for you. The reason it has to be done after other steps is too broad of a subject, but I think that in some circles, certainly as I was coming up in Drupal, it was like a magical invocation that wizards would do. They would run some commands, and then they would run Drush CC, which is the old version, and Drush RR, which is another old thing, because it just kind of like checks, it dumps any old information and just checks to make sure everything is as expected. So it's non-destructive, it's not really a problem. You can always run it, and it usually does eliminate other possibilities of, perhaps outdated data being stored somewhere. All right, still scrolling. Charles, thank you for that awesome Drupalize Me link. Drupalize Me is a wonderful resource for learning more about this stuff. Julianne asks, one problem I ran into with version control in Drupal is that many UI changes are stored in the database rather than file system. Any recommendations? And this is on Drupal 7. Features module is what I would recommend for Drupal 7. If anybody else I haven't actively worked on a Drupal 7 site in a while, so if anybody else has a different suggestion, please drop it in the chat. But features module basically lets you kind of pull configuration into its own custom module that you can then kind of commit to version control and move from system to system. Drupal 8 uses configuration management, which is that Drush command I was showing you. But it is an oddity of Drupal 7, and I think it's why the configuration management system was built to kind of get around what is otherwise a pretty thorny problem in terms of moving a database. Merging a database is a really complicated thing. So still scrolling. Yep, I see some references to that. Portmanteau. Thank you, Kristen, for clarifying my English major forgetfulness. Okay, we're trying to create a test environment, so we aren't always making changes to production. Want to push pull those changes to test or production. Yeah, Drupal 7 features module. It is definitely the best way. I would actually, Julianne, it's not talked about very much because we have a new system, but if you would go back to DrupalCon's like Los Angeles, probably, there will be recordings on YouTube on the Drupal Association channel of people talking about features. It was a huge part of Drupal in Drupal 7. So there's still a ton of resources out there. They're just kind of not happening live anymore, but it is really helpful. I'm seeing a lot of frustration around features. I'm sorry, it is hard. It's, I think, the best way to do it. You see some hatred for Composer. Composer's pretty rough, I do agree. Tara's tell of the Douglas Adams universe might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. Could I share the slides? I did. I'll share the link again. Sorry, gotta grab it. Awesome. Christina says, I wish I had you to explain this to me years ago. I made this talk for myself years ago, so I wish I could have done it too. All right. Yes, I would absolutely love for people to fill out the SurveyMonkey. Just I give this talk at camps as well, so it helps me to always improve it and hear what's working for you, what isn't working for you. Can I talk a little bit on using Drush in multi-site? The frank answer is no. I haven't ever done it. I have not used a lot of Drupal multi-site. If somebody else has thoughts, I'd be happy to open the floor on the stage, or you can put it in the chat, of course. Ruby wants to know why Drush and Orlando seem to break if I don't use them for a month. Trying to think if I know the answer to that. The mysteries of the command line. I don't know. I would guess possibly one of them is updating and the other one's not, and they have conflicts, but that's totally just pulling something out of thin air. Does Pantheon have a sort of step-by-step instruction on command line instructions specific to the hosting environment / local environment? We absolutely do. Pantheon is a very opinionated platform, and see. I'm trying to pull up our docs. So I don't know how, I don't want to go too far into this. I want to make sure it's still sort of helpful for everyone, but I'll drop some links in here for you, Anastasia. Command line is addictive. I absolutely agree. All right. Is there a sandbox to practice CLI without worrying about breaking anything? I think that there is. Let me grab the link for you. A lot of the stuff, if you're just like, this one doesn't have a sandbox. You can definitely navigate around without any like real danger. It's when you start running like remove commands or drush commands, which are substantially more complicated than navigation commands. But this, I just dropped a link in that hopefully will be helpful to you, Melanie. Follow up on version control with Drupal. Is there a better solution for Drupal 9? I'm guessing that you're asking specifically about the database complication of moving between environments. Configuration management is the best thing for Drupal 9. It makes YAML files, which are just basically text files that indicate what the different settings should be that you can then import and export really easily. And it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. Honestly, I really like it. All right. Sorry, I'm like way behind in the chat, so I'm sorry if I'm missing something. Drush versus Drupal console, which one and why? Drupal console, at least last time I looked at it, is more of a scaffolding tool. So if you're writing Drupal modules, it will scaffold them out. It will create the files you need, which is super awesome. Drush, I feel, is more of a like maintenance tool. Like when you're actually working on a site, it can do things, make the Drupal site do certain things. That's I have not used Drupal console all that much, so I would not take this as gospel truth, but that was certainly my understanding of the two tools. So I would say Drush and Drupal console rather than versus. I think they're complementary tools rather than competitors. All right. Good questions. Awesome. Thank you so much. I will be at the Pantheon booth. I will be at the Drupal diversity booth. I'm happy to talk command line stuff like literally anytime because I find it very addictive and exciting. So come let me talk my ear off if you're interested. Talk your ear off. Thank you so much. I hope you all had a fantastic DrupalCon day 1. Day 2 starts in 12 hours, so get some sleep. Thank you all so much. It's been really fun to watch the chat too. I hope that this is helpful. It seems like it was for some of you. And yeah, thanks so much. Have a great DrupalCon, and I'll see you around the internet.